Hi, this is Maria Williams. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make 2 cards using the Falling Flowers bundle and how to tape your dies together to quickly cut groups of images. The stamp set I'm going to be using for these cards is the Falling Flower stamp set, and I'm also using the Coordinating Mayflowers framelits. The stamps have a little tab on them that allows you to align them easily to the framelits, which also have a little tab. So I'm taking 4 of the flower stamps and I'm lining them up onto one acrylic block, and for the most part I'm putting the tabs facing up so that when I get ready to align the framelits I'll have a really easy time. But I do want to make sure that they all fit on one block. Now that I have all my stamps set up on the block, I'm going to take a piece of Whisper White cardstock and my embossing buddy and prep the surface for embossing. I'm using Versamark ink, making sure I get good coverage on the stamps, and I'm going to stamp it onto the white cardstock and then apply some white embossing powder and heat set it with my heat tool. You can't really see the flowers right now, but when I apply a little bit of ink onto them, you'll be able to see them. I've selected 4 of the new in colors from Stampin' Up. They are Emerald Envy, Flirty Flamingo, Peekaboo Peach, and Sweet Sugar Plum. And I'm using little finger daubers that just fit on the tips of your fingers. And I've selected the Sweet Sugar Plum for the largest flower. I'm planning to send this card to someone who is having some difficulties right now, so I didn't want it to be too bright, and that's the more muted color. So I'm just taking my dauber and adding some ink and then removing some of the ink on the side of the cardstock and then coloring my flower with the dauber. If I were to go directly from the pad onto the flower, I would probably get too much color concentrated in one spot. So I'm just, like I said, removing a little bit of the ink and then just kind of using a swirling motion to apply the color. I'm going to continue doing this with each one of the colors and each individual flower until I have them all colored. Now I'm taking the coordinating dies and I'm placing them around each of the flowers, and I'm using a little bit of post-it tape to hold them in place. And as you saw at the beginning of the video, all my stamps are on one block and I'm stamping them together. And so I'm trying to strategically tape the dies together so that when I stamp the flowers onto another piece of paper and then I get ready to die cut the flowers again, the dies will already be all together and I won't have to do all this individual lining up of the die, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. So I've secured them all together. I'm taking them over to my die cutting machine, and here they are all cut out, and as you can see my dies are staying together because of the tape that I placed in between them. I've cleaned up my stamps, and now I'm taking some black archival ink, inking up the flowers, stamping them onto the same white Whisper White cardstock, and then I'm going to take the dies that are already connected with the post-it tape and put them in place and run them through my Big Shot machine so I can get everything die cut all at once. And as you can see, it's very easy for me to line this up all in one step instead of having to do each one individually. I'm going to watercolor this set of flowers, so I'm taking the same inks that I used before. I've already squeezed my ink pad so that I could get a little bit of ink onto the lid, and now I'm just taking a water brush and a smaller brush, and I'm not using the water brush with the water that's in the reservoir. Instead, I have a little bowl with some plain water. I feel like I get a little bit more control when I watercolor this way than if I try to use the water from the water brush. I tend to squeeze too hard and then I get too much water out. So I'm just using the bowl, and I'm starting out, because this is actually my first time using these inks, these ink colors, I'm being very careful and really watering down the ink so that I'm getting a very light wash of color. And then I'm slowly going around adding a little bit more and a little bit more. You do want to be careful that you don't saturate the paper too much because this is just Whisper White cardstock that I'm using. So just kind of go around lightly and then if you can be patient, let it dry for a little bit and then go back to it if you want to keep adding more color. So I'm just going to do the same thing with each one of the flowers, and I'm pretty much using the same colors on the same flowers as I used before. And then I'm going to go ahead and put together 2 cards. For this first card, I'm using the watercolored flowers, and I'm going to use a Crazy About You stamp set with the coordinating Hello You thinlits. And I've taken some basic black cardstock to cut out the U, a white thick white cardstock card base that I had ruined before, a piece of smoky slate striped paper from the Basics pack, and I couldn't decide if I was going to mat the sentiment with the flowers in black or sweet sugar plum, and I decided that the sweet sugar plum was more appropriate. The black just looked a little bit too dark. So I'm gluing the piece of designer Sears paper to the card front, again covering the whole thing, and then I'm going to work on my centerpiece. I'm using some post-it tape again, and because I'm going to stamp some leaves and I don't want them to stick out beyond where the flowers are going to be, I am masking the area to the left of the flowers and kind of eyeballing where I'm going to stamp the leaves. I'm using the Emerald Envy ink to stamp 1 set of leaves at the top and 1 set of leaves at the bottom. Next, I'm going to figure out the placement of my flowers and of my sentiment. And I'm using the Thinking Of from the Crazy About You stamp set. I'm just taking some black archival ink again. And I decided maybe I better kind of lay out the whole card together, make sure I wasn't going to change my mind. And so again, I'm just stamping that. I'm just kind of eyeballing it and hoping that I can get it all straight. And it looks pretty good. So first I'm attaching the panel to the piece I'm going to mat it on, gluing that onto my card base, and then I'm going to do the rest of the assembly. I'm going to attach the 2 smaller flowers directly to the card just with some glue, and I'm going to attach the larger flower on top with some dimensional. I'm applying some glue to the back of the sentiment with a fine tip glue pen, and I really should have been wearing my glasses to do this, but I wasn't, and I put a little bit too much glue on, so it did squish out a little bit when I applied the sentiment to the card. Another option instead of doing this is to put some double stick adhesive onto your cardstock before you run it through the die cutting machine with the die, and that way all you have to do is peel off the backer. But I did clean off the glue from around the sentiment as best I could, and then I'm going to apply some Wink of Stella to give it a little bit of shimmer and hopefully disguise the glue a little bit more. At this point, I decided that I was not happy with the Thinking Of, and so I took my embossing supplies out again on my black cardstock and white embossed the sentiment onto the black cardstock and then just trimmed it out, added some dimensionals, and placed it right on top of the other sentiment. And before the card was totally done, I had to add 3 silver sequins from the Metallics sequins pack, as well as a little bit more Wink of Stella all over the flowers for a little bit extra shimmer. For the second card, I'm using a sentiment from the new stamp set Better Together, and I'm stamping it toward the bottom of a Whisper White panel that is cut to 3 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it's going to cover the right side of the front of my card. And I also have a piece of gold stripe paper from the Basics paper stack, and I'm arranging my flowers to figure out where I want them to go. And I feel like I'm missing a little bit of something, so I decided to add a thin stripe of black cardstock at this point. So I'm attaching the Designer Series paper with snail to the front of the card first, and then I'm going to attach the strip of black, and then I'm going to attach the panel with the sentiment to the front of the card with some dimensionals. I'm attaching the flowers like I did in the previous card, the smaller flowers directly to the card with some of the fine tip glue pen, and then the larger flower with some dimensionals. For a touch of gold and a little bit of shimmer, I am taking my gold Wink of Stella pen and filling in the insides of all the flowers. I have to admit that my sequins came out and I actually had them spread out on the card, but in the end I decided to smush a little bit of ink onto a block and add some water and then mask off the flowers because I didn't want any splatter on them. And then I took the water brush and just flicked some of the watered down ink onto the card. And that finished off the second card. Thanks so much for watching. If you would like to see additional pictures or information on the products used, please visit my blog at mariascardsandmore.com. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up.